Recently, with the Back to the Beginning concert, the rock community all over the world celebrated Black Sabbath, who, for many years now, have reached the status they deserve for the pioneers they certainly are. Everybody, even the non-rock fans, recognize them as one of the most important contributors to heavy music in the history of this type of sound, probably the most important. And of course people talk about the years with Ozzy at the helm, or those with Ronnie James Dio fronting the band. These are the years the band is mostly remembered for. But wait a minute, there was also another period. You see, the name Black Sabbath was never retired from the music world since 1969, when the band Earth changed its name, and there were years when neither Ozzy nor Dio were the singers of the band. These were crazy, wild, strange, misunderstood, and for some people forgotten years, but they still remain a part of Black Sabbath's history. So many interesting things happened during this period that, as you'll see, they could easily fill a very long video. Just think that in these approximately 14 years, the band had 24 different lineups, some of which lasted for a month, or just one concert. Rumors circulated that Michael Bolton, yes, that Michael Bolton, auditioned for the singer position, and that a Christian televangelist was a member of the band for 3 months. To put it simply, it was a period when we were never bored. Let's find out more about it.
What you gonna be, brother? Hero.
Despite the very successful Mob Rules album and tour, and for reasons that have been thoroughly documented, in December of 1982, guitarist Tony Iommi decides to fire singer Ronnie James Dio from the band. To sum it up, there were various misunderstandings between the two parts regarding the next release of Black Sabbath, a live album called Live Evil, which were fueled by the consumption of copious amounts of cocaine by the guitarist. The album will be released in January 1983, and by that time the band was missing 50% of its lineup, because when Dio left, he took drummer Vinny Appice with him, leaving Iommi and bassist Geezer Butler looking for both a singer and a drummer. The first people they had in mind were Robert Plant or David Coverdale for the singer position and Cozy Powell as the drummer. Coverdale and Powell were integral part of Whitesnake and decided to stay there, while Plant wouldn't even consider it. That's when the rumor started that they tried out Michael Bolton. To be honest, Butler has said that Iommi started it as a joke, and Bolton himself confirmed that it was just a rumor. For the first, but certainly not the last time in our story, the band's manager, the notorious Don Arden, enters the narrative. Due to a complicated affair that involves an adulterous relationship by his part and the wrath of his daughter Sharon, Ozzy Osbourne's manager and future wife, he had to do anything in his power to make the next Sabbath album more successful than Ozzy's next album. So he wanted a big name to front the band, and the only one available in the heavy rock world at the time was that of former Deep Purple singer Ian Gillan. So that was his intention, and he started doing everything he could so that it would become reality. Now, how Gillan eventually ended up becoming a member of Black Sabbath is a piece of myth in itself. Given the places in England they were living at the time, Tony and Geezer met Ian at a pub called The Bear in Oxfordshire, as it was situated more or less in the middle of the distance between them. All three, drunk heavily, became totally wasted, and neither of them remembers how the night ended. The next morning, Gillan's manager called him and said, "Can you please inform me too when you make such decisions?" And Gillan replied, "What decision did I make? To join Black Sabbath." Gillan didn't remember agreeing to anything at all, but he probably had. Now, the original idea was to form a supergroup that would not be called Black Sabbath. The drummer, Bill Ward, was soon added to this supposed supergroup. Realizing that they wouldn't get Cozy Powell, Iommi and Butler strongly pressured their recently sober former bandmate, who agreed to join. But when it was time for the album to be released, Don Arden wouldn't let them have any other name, with 3/4 of the original Black Sabbath in the band. When the recording was finished, he presented them with ready-made contracts under the name Black Sabbath and told them that was the end of it. Of course, the stories about this album don't end here. Quite the opposite, in fact. During its recording, which took place at the Manor, a studio in Oxford, with a very large surrounding area. Ian Gillan had set up a circus tent in which he stayed. Iommi didn't believe it at first, until he went and saw it with his own eyes. According to the singer himself, the reason he did this is that he had completely different habits from his bandmates. They were night owls who slept all day and recorded all night, while he wanted to have normal sleeping hours. As he said, he would wake up, have his breakfast, and then go to the studio and listen to what had been recorded the previous night. On the other hand, Iommi has said that this differentiation showed that the singer never considered himself a full member of the band. Bill Ward remained sober for most of the recordings, but towards the end he started drinking again and realized that all the work he had done to keep himself straight had been wasted. While, on the other hand, he was dreading the prospect of a tour. So, when he finished his parts, he left the band again. This album remains his last official recording for Black Sabbath to this day. Another major issue that arose was the mixing, which is perhaps the biggest flaw of the album. Before the tour began, Butler listened to the master tapes, and obviously, he didn't like their quality at all. Iommi told him, "Don't worry, they'll clean it up in the mix." But neither he nor the bassist were present for that. As you can judge from the final result, this cleaning never happened, and when the band heard the final product in the middle of the tour, the album had already been released and there was nothing they could do. In the end, Butler will say, "This is what happens when you don't have a proper producer like Martin Birch managing the situation." Let's talk about the tour now. A lot of things happened there. Initially, the drummer was Bev Bevan, formerly of ELO, who had nothing to do with heavy metal. He was simply chosen because Don Arden knew him. Gillan didn't know the lyrics to the old Sabbath songs and couldn't learn them no matter what because, as he said, they were completely different from the way he thought. So he wrote them on sheets of paper, laminated them, and tied them together in a binder that he placed on the stage floor, turning the pages with his foot. But the thing is, the band used 6 buckets of dry ice at every show, which fogged up the plastic, and he couldn't read the lyrics. Also, at the suggestion of Don Arden, the band used a dwarf dressed as the baby on the album cover. So this dwarf was walking on their Stonehenge replica, and as the pre-recorded part of a baby crying faded out, he would fall 10 meters onto some cushions, and the show would begin. One day, by chance, for fun, no one knows why, they didn't put the pillows back in place, and since then no one ever saw the dwarf again. Let's also talk about the Stonehenge replica, since we mentioned it. The album features a short instrumental called Stonehenge. Butler had the idea to put a replica of the monument on stage. So far, so good. Now, when time came to order the replica, they gave the dimensions in feet, but the person who wrote them down thought they were in meters. So, they ordered a replica of 45 feet, which is about 15 meters, and were delivered a replica of 45 meters, which would not fit in many of the clubs they were going to play in. For those who have seen the film This Is Spinal Tap, there's a parody of the whole story, but in reverse, meaning the replica is very small. Whether it was due to protests from religious organizations or because the Stonehenge replica didn't fit in the clubs, or due to low ticket sales, 30% of the 96 shows planned for the tour were cancelled. In fact, towards the end, the band played Smoke on the Water as an encore. After the completion of the tour in March 1984, Gillan left to join the reunited Deep Purple. Bevan left because he realized he didn't fit, and as we will see, Butler also left because he was having problems with his newborn son and couldn't dedicate himself 100% to the band. So Iommi was left alone, leading to the events of the next chapter. For the record, the album was released on September 9, 1983, under the title Born Again. It received many negative reviews, either due to the final mix or the incompatibility of the Gillan and Sabbath combination. But despite this, it did particularly well in sales, and thus, at least from a commercial perspective, the idea of keeping the name Black Sabbath was correct. Personally, I really like it as an album, although I understand the objections people had at the time. However, it seems that Gillan has very good memories of his Sabbath period, as in his most recent statements, he has said that he had a great time with Sabbath. It was a continuous party that lasted a year. I can't close this chapter without mentioning something about the album cover, which is considered one of the worst covers in rock history. The artist who created it is named Steve Jewell, and he used a photograph of a newborn baby from a magazine of the 1960s. Rumor has it that because he was Ozzy's collaborator, in fact he designed the cover for Speak of the Devil, he deliberately made it so awful to show his loyalty to the band's former frontman. Butler has said that when they saw it, it seemed truly disgusting to them, while Gillan has stated that when he first saw it, he vomited. But Arden liked it, so the story ended there.
Say your prayers tonight.
After Gillan's departure, the band recruited an unknown singer from Los Angeles, named David Donato, while Bill Ward rejoined the band. The new lineup wrote material and rehearsed throughout 1984 and finally recorded a demo with the well-known producer Bob Ezrin in October of the same year. Unhappy with the results, the band fired Donato shortly after. Disappointed by the constant lineup changes, Ward left again, stating, "This isn't Black Sabbath." As we saw, Butler would also resign in November 1984, leaving Tony Iommi as the only member of the band. One of the strangest stories that circulated during this time is that Christian evangelist and former Joshua frontman, Jeff Fenholt, was the singer for Black Sabbath between January and May 1985. Iommi has never confirmed this, although Fenholt himself details it in one of the many books written about the band's history. Being the only member left, Iommi decided to put Sabbath on ice and began working on a solo album with the band's longtime keyboardist, Jeff Nichols. While working on the new material, the original Sabbath lineup agreed to participate in Bob Geldof's Live Aid, playing at the Philadelphia show in July 1985. This event marked the first time the original lineup had appeared on stage together since 1978. It wasn't the best of shows. As Geezer Butler recalls, "We were all drunk when we did Live Aid, but we all got drunk separately." Returning to his solo work, Iommi recruited bassist Dave Spitz, formerly of Great White, and future Kiss drummer Eric Singer, while initially intending to use multiple singers, including Rob Halford of Judas Priest, former Deep Purple singer Glenn Hughes, and Ronnie James Dio himself. However, things didn't go as planned. It was very difficult to get these singers released from their record companies, so once Glenn Hughes was able to come and record a track, the guitarist decided to keep him for the entire album. The band spent the second half of 1985 in the studio with producer Jeff Glixman. Warner Brothers refused to release the album as a Tony Iommi solo release, insisting on using the name Black Sabbath. Under pressure from the band's manager, Don Arden, the two sides compromised and released the album under the name Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi in January 1986. Another rumor has it that the guitarist was offered a Rolls-Royce as a gift to agree to the change of name. The album's title was Seventh Star. Its sound is a drastic and deliberate departure from the classic Black Sabbath sound, given that there were no plans to release it under that name. But that's how it turned out in the end, which certainly had a negative impact on the impression it made, as Iommi himself has admitted. It's a very good hard rock album, but definitely not a Black Sabbath record. In modern reviews that have appeared online, it is referred to as misunderstood and underrated. The lineup rehearsed for 6 weeks, preparing for a full world tour, but obviously not everyone was happy with the situation. I was 100% into the Tony Iommi solo vibe, but the idea of being Black Sabbath's singer didn't appeal to me at all. Glenn Hughes singing for Black Sabbath is like James Brown singing for Metallica, the former Deep Purple frontman would later state. 4 days before the tour was set to begin, the singer got into a fight with the band's production manager, John Downing, who broke the orbital bone in his nose. So he couldn't sing comfortably, and after 5 concerts on the tour, he was fired. He will be replaced by the then unknown American singer Ray Gillan, with whom the tour will be completed, although almost half of the dates in the US were cancelled due to low ticket sales. After the tour ended, the band began working on new material in October 1986 at AIR Studios on the Caribbean island of Montserrat, with Jeff Glixman again producing. The recording was plagued with problems from the start, as Glixman left after the initial sessions to be replaced by Vic Coppersmith-Heaven. Very soon, bassist Dave Spitz also left, and his place was taken by former Rainbow and Ozzy Osbourne bassist Bob Daisley, who re-recorded all of Spitz's parts and also wrote the album's lyrics. Iommi would have liked to keep him permanently, but he would leave toward the end of the recordings to join Gary Moore's band, taking drummer Eric Singer with him. As there were problems with the second producer as well, the band returned to Morgan Studios in England in January 1987, with Chris Tsangaridis as the new producer. That's when an increasingly frustrated and disappointed Ray Gillan decided to leave the band. According to Daisley, Gillan was having a lot of difficulty writing lyrics. The management wasn't paying him or the rest of the band, and he was also having communication problems with Arden and Iommi. It should be mentioned here that while his voice is not heard on the final album, bootleg demos with him on vocals were circulating for years, which were eventually officially included in the deluxe reissue of that album in 2010. For those who don't know it, Gillan, after continuing his rock journey with bands like Blue Murder and Badlands, passed away from AIDS in late 1993. Various singers were auditioned before the band settled on the unknown Englishman, Tony Martin, perhaps due to the similarity of his voice to Ronnie James Dio's. Martin, with the help of Tsangaridis, will re-record Gillan's vocals, note for note, further increasing the cost and duration of the production. The album will finally be released in November 1987 and will be titled The Eternal Idol. The album notes incorrectly state that Dave Spitz played bass, when in reality, as we saw, the album was written by Bob Daisley. Objectively, again, it is a quite good, albeit underrated record, although it would have been more fitting being released with Gillan, the one for whom it was written and designed from the beginning. Commercially, it didn't do very well, peaking at number 66 in the UK and only as high as 168 in the US. After the departure of Daisley and Singer, Dave Spitz returned, and Bev Bevan, whom we met in the previous chapter, also rejoined the band. The turmoil continued when the band booked 6 concerts in South Africa in the midst of the apartheid crisis. Bevan left after disagreeing with the move and was replaced by former Clash drummer Terry Chimes. Spitz also left soon, and Joe Burt, formerly of the band Virginia Woolf, took his place. The tour was one of the shortest in Sabbath history, with a total of 20 dates, 1 in my country, 6 or 7 in South Africa, and some in Germany and Italy. One reason for the very small number of shows was also the reactions caused by the decision of the band to play in South Africa. One of the classic Sabbath stories of the time involves the filming of the music video for The Shining, which took place between Spitz's departure and Burt's arrival. According to Martin, the person appearing as the bassist in the music video was a stranger they literally picked up off the street. He told them he was a guitarist and of Native American descent. After the filming ended, they never saw him again. Due to the poor commercial performance of The Eternal Idol, their record label Vertigo decided to terminate their contract, although they immediately found a new home by signing with IRS. The band took a break for the first half of 1988, returning in August to start working on their next album. As a result of the recording problems with The Eternal Idol, Tony Iommi chose to produce the album himself. It was a completely new beginning, the guitarist said. I had to reconsider the whole matter and decided it was necessary to rebuild our credibility. Iommi recruited former Rainbow drummer Cozy Powell, who this time accepted his offer, longtime keyboardist Nichols and session bassist Lawrence Cottle, and rented a very cheap studio in England. During the recordings, he also received a call from Gloria Butler, Geezer's wife and manager, who told him that the bassist wanted to rejoin Sabbath. However, Butler eventually joined Ozzy's band and participated in his No Rest for the Wicked tour. The guitarist's intention was to bring back Ronnie James Dio or ask again David Coverdale to join the band, but Powell eventually convinced him to keep Martin. Although primarily a session musician, Lawrence Cottle appeared in the video for the title track, but was soon replaced by former Whitesnake and Gary Moore bassist Neil Murray, who did all the promotional activities and played on the tour. The album will be released on April 17, 1989, under the title Headless Cross. Although it was once again ignored by contemporary critics, it performs slightly better commercially than The Eternal Idol, number 31 in the UK chart and number 115 in the US, and it is considered the album that has aged the best out of all these made during this period, with some pundits calling it the best Black Sabbath album without Ozzy or Dio. I'm not sure that I agree with this opinion, as there's also the next release, but I will have to admit that it's a truly excellent album. Lyrically, it is perhaps Black Sabbath's work with the most references to the occult in their whole history. The reason is simple. When Tony Martin attempted to write his first lyrics for the band, he assumed, due to their reputation, that everyone expected something like that from him, satanic references, gothic horror, and all that stuff. Of course, if he, like many others, had paid closer attention, he would have realized that the band's songs that actually refer to such things are very few, perhaps no more than 5. The Headless Cross tour began in the summer of 1989, with 10 performances in North America, 8 in the United States, 2 in Canada. Further scheduled dates ended up being cancelled due to minimal interest and negligible pre-sales. In September, the band played another 10 shows in the UK and continued in mainland Europe in early October. Black Sabbath was one of the first bands to tour Russia, where they gave a total of 25 performances in Moscow and St. Petersburg. The band returned to the studio in February 1990 to record the successor to Headless Cross. Now aware of how Martin wrote, Iommi and Powell told him to tone down the occult element, so he focused more on themes from Norse mythology. The fact that the album's title and several songs refer to this theme led many people to believe that it is a concept album. Bassist Neil Murray dispelled this notion in 2005, stating that a very small portion of the album has anything to do with Norse mythology and that it is by no means a concept album. The work was produced by Iommi and Powell, a choice that received both criticism, from some who claim that Cozy Powell's drumming drowns out most of the other instruments, and praise, from others who noted that it is one of Sabbath's heaviest albums. Also, the band has repeatedly stated that while they don't disown or regret it, the song Feels Good to Me was included on the album solely to be released as a single and doesn't fit musically with the rest of the record. A record that will be released in August 1990 and will be titled Tear. In an era when thrash metal was at its peak, glam metal was still holding on, and alternative metal was starting to emerge, the album was completely ignored in America, receiving poor reviews and failing to enter the Billboard Top 200 for the first time in the band's history. It did much better in the UK, where it reached number 24. Personally, I think it's one of the heaviest things Sabbath ever did, and at times, I think it even surpasses Headless Cross. It's interesting to note that although Tyr is a real person in Norse mythology, the son of Odin, the rune that appears on the album cover is incorrect, as it is pronounced as X or Z and not as Y. Obviously it was used because it looked like a Y, not because it's the correct one. The album tour was limited to the UK and Europe, and also for the first time in the band's history, it did not include any dates in America. While on his Lock Up the Wolves album tour in the US in August 1990, the band's former singer, Ronnie James Dio, brought Geezer Butler on stage at a concert at the Roy Wilkins Auditorium in Minnesota, where they played Neon Nights together. After the show, the two of them expressed their desire to rejoin Sabbath. To be honest, at that time Butler wasn't doing anything particularly noteworthy in his career, while Dio had seen his popularity decline dramatically. The bassist immediately talked about the idea with Tony Iommi and eventually convinced him. So the guitarist disbanded the Tear lineup, summarily firing Martin and Murray. He will regret this decision in the future. He will say, "We were at a good point back then. We decided to reconnect with Dio, and I don't even know why really. There's the financial aspect, but that wasn't it. I seem to think maybe we could recapture something that we once had."
Listen to the wind, hear the gospel blow. Tell me that you don't.
The way Martin was fired from the band wasn't the most gracious or fitting. When Geezer Butler and Tony Iommi gave an interview for Kerrang! In mid-1991 to celebrate the return of the bassist and Dio to the band, they said they needed to find a way to get rid of Tony Martin, a statement that effectively finished him, for the time being, from the band. Officially, he was never fired. Dio and Butler will meet with Iommi and Powell in the fall of 1991 to begin working on the next Sabbath release. In November, Powell broke his hip while horseback riding. Apparently unable to complete the album, he was replaced by another former drummer of the band, Vinny Appice, thus recreating the lineup of Mob Rules. The recording was plagued by problems, stemming mainly from tension between Dio and Iommi over songwriting. The situation reached a point when Tony Martin, who was working on his solo record at the time, briefly returned to the band to work on the songs as well. The album will finally be released on June 22, 1992, and will be titled Dehumanizer. In many ways, it was the big comeback everyone had been expecting, reaching number 40 on the American charts and rekindling public interest in the band. In other respects, not so much, as Iommi would say the production cost him $1 million and the band lost a lot of money on this album. The tour began in July 1992. As you might know, this lineup would collapse again when the band was asked to play as a support act for Ozzy Osbourne's supposed final 2 concerts in Costa Mesa, California, in November 1992. Dio stubbornly refused to do the shows, called Ozzy a clown, and left the band for a second time, taking Appice with him again. Since Dio left the day before the shows, the band thought about bringing Tony Martin from England, but because he didn't have a visa, they ended up using Rob Halford of Judas Priest instead. With a potential reunion of the original Black Sabbath lineup starting to be talked about as an idea, Iommi and Butler decided to stay together, brought back former Rainbow drummer Bobby Rondinelli, and rehired Tony Martin for the 3rd time in our story. They entered the studio in 1993 to record an album, also the 3rd in this story, that was not intended to be named Black Sabbath, as it was thought as a release to fill the gap until the reunion, and which, like the other 2, was of course released under the name Black Sabbath on January 31, 1994, with the title Cross Purposes. Commercially, it didn't do as well as Dehumanizer, but at least better than Tear. To say that the album received a mixed reception is the greatest understatement in this story. One critic wrote that Soundgarden's Super Unknown is a much better Sabbath album than this mess, while another said it's the first album since Born Again that actually sounds like Black Sabbath. Personally, I lean toward the second view. There are, indeed, parts in there that sound like the original Black Sabbath, although I do miss a bit of the gothic feel of Headless Cross and Tear. It's also interesting to note that the song Evil Eye was written by Mr. Edward Van Halen himself, which is not mentioned on the album due to legal issues. The tour will begin in America in February 1994 and continue in Europe, after which, at the end of June 1994, Rondinelli will leave and be replaced by Bill Ward for 5 dates in South America. When the Cross Purposes tour ended, a completely disillusioned Geezer Butler would leave the band for the 2nd time and release a solo album under the name GZR, on which, through the song Giving Up the Ghost, he would express his opinion on the band's current situation, strongly criticizing Tony Iommi. Luckily, he didn't take it too personally. Otherwise, none of the reunions of the following years would have happened. And of course, he wasn't at all discouraged by what was happening, as he soon managed to bring Murray and Powell back into the fold, thus recreating the Tear lineup. This lineup, at the end of 1994, entered Parr Street Studios in Liverpool, where, within 3 months, they wrote and recorded a new album. Now, Anyone who knew beforehand who the album's producer would be might have started to doubt. The choice fell on Ernie C., the guitarist of the rap metal band Body Count. In fact, on the opening track, the singer of Body Count, the well-known rapper Ice-T, makes an appearance. The album will be released on June 5, 1995, under the title Forbidden. It received the worst reviews of the band's career. It was literally buried by everyone who cared to write about it. I think anyone who has ranked Sabbath albums in the history of the internet always starts with Forbidden, putting it last. Subsequent statements from those involved in this release tried in various ways to downplay the negative impression. Iommi said the whole collaboration with Ice-T and his people was imposed on him by the record company. Although he thought the rapper was a good guy, he claimed that the choice of producer was a huge mistake, and also that they paid the price for Powell and Murray not being present during the recording process, which moved very quickly, leaving the three who remained behind, himself, Martin, and Nichols, no time to consider if what they were doing was right. Ernie C., for his part, has defended his choices for the album, saying he wanted to make the Sabbath sound drier and beef it up in a way, get it out of the tunnel, as he put it. He also added that Iommi was the one who asked them for a collaboration after hearing Body Count's cover of War Pigs. Perhaps the most serious assessment/accusation for the album comes from Martin, who says that it was made this way to fulfill the band's obligations to IRS and pave the way for the reunion with Ozzy, which had been in the works for quite some time. He also said that in one swift move it got the band out of their contract, made them fire their singer, and prepared the reunion. The truth is, however, that in July 1995, the band actually went on a world tour, 2 months after the start of which, Powell left for health reasons and was replaced by Rondinelli. After the tour ended, Iommi put the band on ice again and started working on a solo album with Glenn Hughes. Even in December 1996, according to the official statements of those involved, the Forbidden lineup had not disbanded, with the guitarist giving the impression that he intended to continue as it was. The dissolution will officially take place in March 1997, when the long-awaited reunion was announced, without Bill Ward for the time being, and essentially, we reached the end of our story. A lot has been said about the Black Sabbath period we examined. If you ask Geezer Butler, he'll tell you that with the exception of Born Again and Dehumanizer, nothing else was Black Sabbath. If you ask the fans, a lot of them will tell you that they love many of the albums released during our story. Something that they proved when the albums with Tony Martin, minus The Eternal Idol, were reissued in remastered versions in 2024, first as the Anno Domini 1989-1995 box set, and then individually. The box set and the reissues were met with great and perhaps unexpected success, to the point, as was commented on social media, that the supply couldn't keep up with the demand. To be honest, they owed this to Tony Martin, because although he got them out of trouble so many times during that period, as we saw, their behavior toward him wasn't the best. Let's not forget that in his autobiography, Iommi has criticized Martin for his attitude during the Cross Purposes period, to which the singer responded by saying that no one ever told him anything about any kind of problems at the time. He has also often expressed his bitterness about the fact, as he puts it, that he and his era had been erased from the band's history. He characteristically stated, "It feels like 10 years of the band's history have been lost. But honestly, it's not that they're cutting me off, they're cutting themselves off too. It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. It seems to me their minds were elsewhere, on whatever brought them the most money. Regardless, it's a period in the history of heavy metal with its good and bad aspects that is reflected through these albums and people involved in them." Yes, Black Sabbath didn't make as much of a mark during this period as they did in their golden days, but they were there, and this, at least, should count for something.